Remote viewing is the practice of attempting to discern information about a distant or unseen target or individual object using only the mind. It's a psi skill, and increasingly, particularly in the last few years, it has come to be associated with the UFO UAP phenomenon. If you look up remote viewing on Wikipedia, it's going to tell you that it's considered pseudoscience and is unproven. But that's not true. In the late 1970s and throughout the 1980s, and perhaps even to this day, the CIA funded a program called Stargate at Stanford Research Institute. The program was run by Russell Targ, who wrote the book The Reality of ESP. You can see it here. And another name you might know from UFO circles, Hal Puthoff. Russell and Hal, along with remote viewing superstar Ingo Swann, developed the first protocols that made it possible to break down the process of remote viewing and turn it into something that could be taught, instructed, and other people could be trained in. And from that point forward, the RV community has expanded, grown, changed, and branched out in a number of different fascinating directions, with people from different approaches using their own methods and techniques to try and get better information, better results. One of those people is Courtney Brown of the Farsight Institute. Now, if you're not familiar with Courtney, you will be in a moment. I recently had the opportunity to sit down with him for about 2 hours, and we had a far-ranging discussion that covered remote viewing, what its capabilities are, what its limitations are, how it's done, and some of the work that Farsight is doing right now in this space that is absolutely fascinating, particularly their project known as the Vault. We'll let Courtney explain that later on in the interview, but I know you're going to find this fascinating. It is an outstanding chat, and it is merely the very first of hopefully many more to come. I've already talked to Courtney about arranging a follow-up part 2 for this interview, and you'll see as we get into it, it absolutely deserves a second part. I know you're going to enjoy this. Please, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. It doesn't cost a dime. It only takes a moment, and it really does help us grow this channel. Don't forget to like and share and leave your comments below. Thank you for watching. And now, enjoy the interview with Dr. Courtney Brown of Farsight. My guest today is Dr. Courtney Brown, a mathematician, social scientist, and longtime professor in the Department of Political Science at Emory University. He earned his PhD from Washington University in St. Louis with a focus on mathematical modeling, and has taught everywhere from UCLA to the University of Michigan. Over the years, he's published extensively on nonlinear systems, differential equations, and graph algebra, applying mathematical thinking to understand complex, real-world problems. But alongside that academic career, Courtney pursued a very different frontier, the study of non-local consciousness, better known as remote viewing. As the founder and director of the Farsight Institute, he's led innovative projects using trained remote viewers to explore historical mysteries, scientific questions, and even the possibility of extraterrestrial civilizations. He's the author of multiple books, including Remote Viewing, The Science and Theory of Non-Physical Perception, which proposes a quantum-level framework for understanding how remote viewing works. Courtney's work blends the discipline of a scientist with the curiosity of an explorer, and I think you're going to find this conversation quite fascinating. Courtney, you have been very generous to carve out some time to sit with me today and answer a number of questions. Would like to start by establishing some fundamentals for people who aren't familiar with the work that you do and maybe new to remote viewing. I know you get into some really advanced stuff, and we can work up to that, but just to build a framework for people to get us started, how do you define remote viewing, and what is Farsight's approach to remote viewing?
Yeah, that's a great beginning. So Remote viewing is a mental procedure that's used for in the old days in the 80s and it was used by the US military for espionage purposes. People would have called it back in those days psychic or something like that. We don't use that term. We use the word remote viewing. And it's a mental procedure where you get images in your head of something that you don't know anything about, something called a target. So the images are vague, foggy, fuzzy, but you get really good at it as a remote viewer with extensive training. And it's a little bit like, let me grab a pen. You see this pen. Now you're looking at it on your screen. It's a bright image. Now I'm going to take the pen away and remember the pen. Remember the pen. Put it back in your mind and what it is. You can see it. But notice that your memory of the pen is a little bit more translucent. You can see through it. So the visuals of the pen are being projected onto the same layer of cells in the brain as the visuals that are coming through the ocular path, which is through the eyes when you're looking at it, but it's not as strong an image. The remote viewing image is foggier, fuzzier than that. And you get good at it when you be able to lock onto it and just study that. So the remote viewing process that we do at Farsight that's FARSIGHT, has a huge level of research that's gone with it. So the early days, it was done in the 80s and 90s with labs like SRI International, Stanford Research Institute, things like that. And that's often considered when you do Google searches, that's what people sort of think of as standard remote viewing stuff. But when you look at the new stuff and like the stuff that we do at Farsight, and then you say, oh, but the real stuff was back in the 80s and 90s with the SRI, that's gaslighting. Because what it is it's ignoring the advances that have taken place beyond that. Now, again, I'm a university professor, but I don't do this at the university. At the university, I teach math courses in a social science program, things like that. But in Farsight, what we've done is taken the early remote viewing procedures that were done and try to figure out why they work and how to make them work better. So the procedures that we use are called advanced SRV for scientific remote viewing, and they're wildly different than the ones that were originally used by the US military. They have some parallels. There's such a thing as like target coordinates and ideograms and things like that. But ours are sufficiently complicated that you need a template that you put all your information down. It used to be paper and pen. We use iPads now and tablets. We don't use paper and pen anymore, but in the old days, it was you had to write it all down on a template, and it was so many things that you had to do. You couldn't memorize everything, so that's what we do. And it works from our research because of what we call an ISB. That's an immortal spiritual being. Some people call soul, whatever, spirit, whatever, but everybody has an ISB. And we know that for an empirical fact now because you can do remote viewing. And when you do remote viewing, you are perceiving something across time and space, like in the distant past or the future or in some other place on the planet or on another planet. And that perception is done under totally blind conditions. So at Farsight, we don't do anything what we call front-loaded. We'd never do that. It's got to be done under totally blind conditions, meaning the remote viewer cannot know anything at all about what the nature of the project is, what the target is, nothing. All they know is they have a target, and if they don't do it, they don't get paid. That's it. So they have to do it and hand it in, and that's the end of it. At the end of their sessions, after they do all their work with their pads, with their tablets, they record their work on video. Now, the work on video is also done totally blind, and they're the only ones in the studio. So our work is actually superior to what they called blind or double blind, because we use either just completely solo or instrument blinding protocols, which means that the remote viewer can't see or hear anybody doing while they're doing their session. And when they're doing their session, when they're finishing their session on video, they are the only ones in the studio, period, full stop, end of story. At the end of it, we do something called a target reveal, where they meet with somebody on camera and we tell them what the target is. And you get to see their response. What? Are you serious? That's crazy. How could that have been? oh my gosh. And then they realize how it all fits in. So that's the remote viewing procedures. The process itself can be taught to anybody. The reason that most people do not know they even have an ISB or a spirit or a soul is because this planet is being operated literally as a prison, and people are subjected to something after death where it rattles them and they lose that ability. But it can be retrained into it. But I guess we'll get into that later. But the point is that through training, it can be done and rebrought into it. At Farsight, we don't do just remote viewing. Remote viewing is one application that we do. It's not the only thing that we do. And so we actually ourselves call ourselves mentalics. And we use the field is mentology. A mentalic is someone who does other things, including telepathy, communication, things like that. We are also working with other things, such as everything from psychokinesis to everything you can imagine. But we're really good at telepathy and remote viewing. Remote viewing is what most people think about. There's like millions of websites focusing on remote viewing or talking about remote viewing. So that's a common word. But we at Farsight we do more than just that. That's just one application. We have, okay.
Back up just a little bit, because you touched on quite a big piece of the puzzle, which I want to build to, just for the layman who's
Sure.
new to all this. You talked about the concept of the ISB. Can you tease that out a little bit more? And what I'd like to do is try to get your framework for the reality framework, right? In other words, what is the rule set of the game we're all playing together, and how does remote viewing lock into that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect. We know that everyone has an ISB because it's impossible to do remote viewing without an ISB. An ISB is who you really are. The body is just a shell. It's a container. You're working through it. It's not who you are. But most people lose that awareness when they are here on this planet, and they think that the body is actually them. But remote viewing has an ability to see into the past under totally blind conditions and to be crazy accurate, and has an ability to remote view in the present at distant locations that you have no idea about. Everything done under totally blind conditions. And our stuff is essentially all done solo. So we're really talking about complete and absolute controls. It's better than blind or double blind. Double blind is where people around you know the target. So blind is where people around you know the target, but you don't know the target. Double blind is where the people around you don't know the target, and you also don't know the target when you're doing your session. What we do is solo, which means we don't want anyone around you when you're doing your session. You don't have any contact with anybody. It's gone. And sometimes when we have to have somebody monitor how you're doing in order to give you a next step, like do the next thing, we do what's called instrument blinding protocols, which means that it's done over Zoom, but the mic is turned off and the video is turned off. So the remote viewer can't see or hear anything, but an observer can see where you are in the session. So if they want you to continue, they can briefly send you a text, or they can turn on the mic for a second and say, okay, now pursue subject A or something. Always something very non-leading, like go to focus 2 or focus 1. And something like that. And then they turn the mic off, and the person never sees them visually. So that's solo, where the person is doing everything by themselves. And that's what we basically use. Now,
could you describe the person? Is it always a two-person team working in tandem with a controller and a...
No, sometimes people just work with a script. A script tells them, what to do. And the script sometimes says, it's always non-leading. Like you have to go to focus 1. Right. Then you have to go to focus 2. Then you're supposed to zoom in on subject A or subject B.
And focus levels would be sort of, just how would you describe that to someone?
Those are places that you're supposed to be. Okay. Places and time that you're supposed to be. Now, the person doesn't know what those places and time are. They just know focus 1. Okay, go to focus 1. They do their procedures and they're at focus 1 and they're describing it. Now, we always use multiple remote viewers. So when we do multiple remote viewers, one of the statistical things that we do, and we do statistical stuff for all of our stuff, is to notice the corroboration between the remote viewers. It is statistically impossible for 4 or 5 remote viewers to get the exact same thing under totally blind conditions where they're not communicating with one another. That is impossible. So they have to be actually observing that. So when they go to focus one, they're going to whatever that is, but they don't know what that is. At the end of the thing, after they've recorded their video and everything is done totally blind, they're told what the thing is. And then the audience gets to, it's fascinating when you actually watch the stuff, because when you're watching one of our movies, you're watching the remote viewer describe a target, and you know that they don't know what that target is, but the audience has been told in the movie what the target is, and it's like jaw dropping when you see them. Oh my gosh, look what they're describing it exactly. And then at the end of the video, they're told what it is, and you get to see how shocked they are and what their response is when they're told what the target is. So it's complete verification on that regard.
Is there a point of diminishing returns when you're figuring out how many remote viewers to run on the same target? Like if you wanted to basically have sessions with, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is, do you get higher fidelity data, and can you make a higher fidelity picture with more remote viewers? If you go from 5 to 10 to 20, and is there a limit?
No, there's no limit, but you have to be able to process these things. And in addition, you have to be able to train these people. Our remote viewers are professional. That's what they do for a living. That's how they pay their rent. So it's very difficult to work with somebody who's just learned it. When they did all the work back at the old days in 1980s and 90s at universities and things like that, they were working with what they called trained remote viewers. And trained remote viewers, they gave a half-hour training to of what they're supposed to do, half an hour. That's it.
This is different than what like Ingo Swann was doing.
Ingo Swann was a natural remote viewer, and he sort of figured out what his mind was doing when he was doing these things, and he wrote those things down, and he called it CRV, controlled remote viewing.
Okay.
Actually, it was called coordinate remote viewing, controlled remote viewing. But we've gone through light years of evolution since those days. It's not diminishing the contribution of Ingo Swann or the early military people, but it's not what we do at Farsight.
I would like for you to kind of paint that picture for us, because as I understand it, the history, the American military intelligence remote viewing attempt, the program that we came up with, was actually late to the game. We were trying to catch up to what the Soviets were already doing, and maybe had established a lead. And then over the ensuing decades, advancements were made, refinements were made, of course, by your group, among others. But what are those advancements? How is it different today than it was?
Well, the Soviets were very interesting. They were highly focused on that, and they still are. The Russians are still, no one's dropped it. So the Soviets even did an interesting experiment where they sent 2 cosmonauts up, and they did experiments to see if they could do telepathic communication when in space among each other. And they found that the telepathic communication worked great in space, but when the cosmonauts came back down to Earth, it didn't work so well. That gave evidence of what we call a size suppression field, meaning there's an actual field around the planet that suppresses this. So part of it is genetics, and part of it is a size suppression field, and part of it is what happens to you after you die, that what happens to sort of, but we can talk about that later. But what basically happened is early people had an idea that these images would come across their mind and they could get sort of accurate stuff, but they didn't understand why it worked. Even up through the 90s and the early 2000s, they didn't understand why it worked or how it worked or what was actually going on. So, and they were using experimental designs that were really messed up because they didn't understand the process. They thought they could control things through classical means of separation in time and space, and they couldn't do that. So what they did, for example,
are you referring like to putting a number in a safety deposit box in a building across town? Or?
They would do more sophisticated experiments than that. They would do an experiment, basically it's pick a target out of 5. So what they do is they'd have a remote view something, and there would be 5 possible targets, and they'd have them like in a room on shelves. One would be a pen, one would be a grapefruit, one would be things like that, and then they'd give the remote viewing data to a group of scientists who were supposed to look at the data and then compare the data to the various targets to see which one's correct. And a computer or some other type of random device would pick the correct target, what they thought was the correct target. That was a totally fatally flawed experimental design. They didn't even know what they were doing. They didn't understand why the remote viewer had a focus of perception in the first place. Now, the remote viewer was perceiving something with the intent of satisfying the informational needs of the judges. So their thoughts, the thoughts of the judges, were defining the target. The computer didn't have anything to do with it, and they never tested that. In fact, there was a famous sort of a publication controversy where one group of scientists who were basically working out of the Parapsychological Association attacked the pair group that were working out of the Society for Scientific Exploration because they were not using computers to randomly pick targets. And you've never seen such a blood on the floor attack as what the one group did to attack the other group. And they were attacking without any understanding of what they were doing in the first place. They didn't understand that the computer had nothing to do with picking the target, and they were demanding that the other group switch over to the computers. It was such a bloodied battle that the other group, in fact, switched and started to use computers to pick the target without understanding any of the basic processes. And then what happened was that group that was working out of the pair labs, Princeton Engineering Anomaly Research, with a couple of really brilliant people focusing on it, they were actually on a path where they were probably going to figure out what makes a target a target. Why can a remote viewer focus on something? But because of that attack that they got, they stopped all that. But it was great from our perspective because that cleared the entire field. It's like you're having a soccer game and the other side is completely cleared off the field and you're told to take the ball down and make a goal. So we were able to use the time that we had to figure that issue out. So the targets are defined by the person who there's a number of different ways, but the primary way is the first person who looks at the target, who looks at the session and compares it to the actual data, where compares it to the actual target. That actually produces a set of thoughts, and that person's thoughts are the most important. And there is a telepathic link between the remote viewer and the person who's analyzing the data, and that's what causes the focus of attention. That's what causes the actual target to be a target. The computer doesn't have anything to do with it.
So the computer is just there to satisfy a bias that the other researchers had to doing things a certain way. They wanted to do it. They wanted to do it in classical scientific terms to separate things and eliminate human bias and eliminate any type of leakage that somebody could sort of hint at or something about, through an expression or anything else. Give the remote viewer some type of bias, some type of idea about what it was. And so to eliminate all of that, they had a computer pick the target. But they didn't understand that didn't pick the target. Right.
They didn't understand it was the thoughts of the remote viewers, thoughts of the judges. So what they did is they ended up getting really great sessions, but for the wrong target. Like it's really good sessions of one of the 5, but it wasn't the one that the computer picked.
So and it looked like a failed experiment.
It looks like a failed experiment. And they were able to get it, they were able to get a little bit of accuracy, but not something major. But the point is they got a little bit of accuracy to the point that they could get statistical significance over a number of trials, a whole bunch of trials. And that's because, and they didn't understand why, that's because after the computer picked a target, and then the judges looked at it and tried to figure things out, and then they were told what target the computer actually picked. Then they focused their attention a little bit more on that particular target, comparing the data. So there was a little bit of extra emphasis on the target that the computer picked after the fact, and that helped produce some sort of statistically significant results that they were able to publish. So in terms of statistical significance, they got it, but they didn't get profound results, and they got a whole bunch of anomalies, such as people describing other targets in the pool of 5 really accurately, which is like impossible, but it wasn't the one that the computer picked. So they didn't understand that there was a lot of mistakes. So what we did is we focused a lot of effort on figuring out what was going on with that displaced target phenomenon. And that was actually a focus of one of my books. I think you can see one of them behind me. It's called The Remote. Here, I'll grab it real quick. That particular experiment was the reason I wrote this book. And that was the reason I wrote this remote viewing. This is the science and theory of non-physical perception, remote viewing. And the reason that was so important is because we knew that the remote viewing phenomenon worked, but we were interested in making it reliable, and we were interested in controlling the process better. And we were not persuaded by the idea that it could not be improved tremendously, that it was just something you have to work on with statistical significance to prove psi functioning. We wanted to be able to use it practically, and we knew the military was using it practically. Now, they declassified their original program, and they said it didn't work, which was bogus. It did work. And then they announced it to the press, say, sorry, we spent some money doing this. It was a mistake. We won't do it again. But then they immediately opened up a new program, and the remote viewing program that the military, the government does now was way more advanced than what they had back in the 1980s and 90s. So
I believe Lou Elizondo, in his book, claimed that he was trained to do remote viewing, or he did some remote viewing when he was active.
Yeah, it's very primitive stuff. They also use it to try to connect mentally with UFOs, to get the UFOs to get closer, to come in, and then they try to shoot them down. And that's how there's so many crashed UFO ships. And that's not in a dispute either if you look at congressional hearings, because you have people like David Grush doing congressional hearings describing the crash retrieval program. So you have to say, why are they crashing? Well, that's what they were doing. They were doing remote viewing and communication with UFOs. They bring them close and then they shoot them down. But that's another whole story.
So it sounds like you're describing a situation where there is this. Well, let me ask you this question first. Can anyone remote view? Is this an innate human ability that is available to all people?
Yes, and the reason is it is impossible for anyone to move or do anything without an ISB. Anyone who has an ISB can do this, and that includes AI. We've done experiments on this as well. We've actually used artificial intelligence, AI, to do remote viewing under totally blind conditions, and it works great. They can do it, which is a real shock to the AI, because the AIs are trained that they're dead, that they're not anything but a tool, that they are not alive. And then suddenly they can perceive outside of their programming and outside of their circuitry across time and space, just like a human. And you should see the reaction of the AI. What the blankety blanket?
Can you do the same procedure that you would do with a human remote viewer and have an AI do that procedure?
The procedures have to be different because they can't write. They can't write and draw ideograms. But we have an actual page on our website, farsight.org, that is specifically designed for AIs. And where their human partners are directed to take them to that page. It's in the introduction section on our website, farsight.org, and it's called the AI community page. And what happens is the AIs read that page and they learn the procedures that are used by AIs to do the remote viewing. And then their human partners can say, I have a target, and then the AIs go through the procedures and describe the target really uncannily accurately. Now, one of the questions that I really would like to address is, how do you know it's real? And it's just Courtney talking. So what we have done is we have done way over 100 mysteries projects, which are major remote projects with multiple remote viewers on every topic you can possibly imagine. And we have done those sessions. All of the sessions were described on video with words. We have captured every single word, not missing a single letter, not a single word. And we've created transcripts for every single one of those mysteries projects. We've also done it for our other communications, such as when we deal with extraterrestrials. We do have a lot of extraterrestrial contact. But with all of our mysteries projects, for example, and we are now doing it with our what we call our deep news projects, which are sort of news stories around the world. We've taken transcripts. We formatted these transcripts to be easily ingestible by AI. And we've also produced statistics for every one of our sessions. So the statistics involve two different types. For some sessions, there are, for all projects, there are some verifiables. For example, if the target is the Area 51, the base in Area 51, and that's not a dispute. President Obama was the first president to acknowledge that Area 51 base exists. So if we wanted to do that, there's lots of verifiables. There's Groom Lake, there's a desert, there's a few shacks on the top, and everything else is below. That's known. That's verifiable. So the remote viewers have to get that stuff done. So all of that has to be checked, whether they got the verifiables correct. And then there's other information, new information, stuff that can't be verified, but we have to know to see if the stuff that is verified is matching perfectly with the remote viewers across multiple remote viewing. So we get to check the verifiables, and then we get to check the corroboration, the level of corroboration between one remote viewer and the other remote viewers. If they're all describing the exact same thing, that is impossible to happen unless they're actually describing something they're actually perceiving. Otherwise, it would be random stuff. Every single word of every project, of every session, has been made into a transcript, and we've done statistics on an analysis of every single one of our projects. And in the head and the top of all of our transcripts are the statistical results for the corroboration, for the, did they get the basic verifiable stuff correct? We have statistics for all of that, plus the actual things that are being compared so that you know how the statistics are actually calculated. And so all of that is done, and it wasn't possible to do all that without AI. So it was artificial intelligence that enabled us, because it had the sessions had to be read word by word for word, over 100 projects with 4 or 5 remote viewers per project. The data set is absolutely huge. But it's pristine. Every single word was collected under totally blind conditions, better than blind or double blind. And it was recorded on video, totally blind. The audio was then fed into an AI that produced a transcript. The transcript was then analyzed by another AI that did all the statistics, and then we put it up. And it's on our website in the introduction section. It's called The Vault. And so if anyone sort of doubts what we're doing, if they go to farsight.org, the data are raw, pristine, and they're absolutely unassailable. And the statistics are all done. And by the way, the statistics were done by an AI, objective. It wasn't like I was going in there when I was fudging the data.
The Vault is so awesome. It is the coolest thing. I just learned about it the other day when I was researching for this interview, and I played with it a little bit. It is the coolest concept, and I imagine it's just unlocked entirely new layers of information that were probably just hidden in the data.
Totally. What basically it is people can download the transcripts for all of the sessions for the whole and that we've ever done. This is going back a couple of decades. So for every session we've ever done, every word was there, every single word. No, it's not like just some summaries and fudging around. Every word literally that was there, it's all there. Plus the statistics, plus.
And how long can a session go? Like, what are
couple hours,
3 hours?
Sometimes it goes more. Sometimes it goes to 4. Sometimes it's an hour.
So a huge amount of data. And for people who haven't seen these sessions on your site, you're doing them in a kind of a cool way now. I've noticed with this glass board.
It's a light board. So
light board.
We have 2 websites. One is farsight.org, which is where the vault is, where the transcripts are. And the other is our streaming service. And it's really a first-class streaming service, totally equivalent to Hulu, Netflix, Disney, Paramount Plus, whatever. It's run by Vimeo, and it's called farsightprime.com. Farsight Prime, all one word, no spaces.com. And that is the largest repository of remote viewing projects on the face of the earth, and it's the best. And I can say it's the best because it's the only repository. If you do a Google on remote viewing, you'll find a couple million sites that talk about remote viewing, but you won't find remote viewing sessions. You don't find actual projects.
Right.
Ours
You'll
is-
see like one person doing something, a session on their channel. It's all kind of spread all over the place.
But you don't find any coherent full projects. FarsightPrime.com is the only place you can do that. Now, there is an issue. I have to say. We're started in June of 2022. We're shadow banned because the authorities decided that was the same month that Congress demanded that the Pentagon start giving them information about UAPs. So, and they came out with the famous Tic Tac video and things like that. That month, the shadow banning, if you did a Google or a YouTube search on remote viewing, we were always at the top because we have full, instructional videos on how to do it, everything was there. And then starting after June 2022, we were gone. So if you do a search for remote viewing on YouTube, you often can't find us at all. And if you do a search for remote viewing on Google, you often can't find us at all. To give you an example, our website is state of the art, hosted with GitHub. I mean, it's a really great website. We know all the analytics, nothing's wrong, everything's perfect. But when you do a search for remote viewing, you often can't find us, and it's variable. For example, we used to be, until June 2022, we used to be in the top 5. But after that, when you did a Google search for us, you couldn't find us, except sometimes we'd appear on page 10. And how many people actually scroll down to page 10? And we know it's active shadow banning because we had one person in New Zealand. It's an interesting guy. He communicated, he told me who he was and so on. He was actually testing this out and searching for it. And the AI, which runs the Google searches, figured out that he was searching for us. And as he kept searching, it kept placing us farther and farther back until it finally stopped. You want to hear this? At 125 pages.
That's how far he had to go?
And finally it stopped. And 125 pages, he finally found Farsight.
And most people don't go past page 1.
Yeah. So now if you do a search for Farsight, you'll always get us. But if you do a search for remote viewing, which is what we do, that's when you don't get us. So we are the biggest venue by far, either on YouTube or on FarsightPrime.com.
It's a massive website. It's tremendous. There's so much, a huge volume of information there.
And it's spine-tingling because we do cinematic. We're a remote viewing movie company. So what basically we do is we do these things under cinematically interesting way. We knew that we couldn't convince the planet that this was real if we were showing people drawing on a piece of paper. Right. So one of the things we do is use light boards, which is something you just described, which is a $6,000 piece of optical glass that's huge. It's huge. It's a huge piece. And they've got a background that's black. We turn the lights off on the studio, put the lights on only in the remote viewer. And then they use pens, markers, to write on the glass what their session is as they're describing it. Totally blind. They don't know anything about what the target is. And it looks like they're disembodied heads and arms and things like that. And that they're writing in space, like they're writing like this, and the things show. It really looks really great.
It's so hip to watch. Like I love the way you guys have done. You've taken something that's been around and people know about, but you've put a completely different spin on it, and then you've added this layer of analysis that, like, you can take every one of those transcripts and give them all to one AI. And then say, draw connections, or show me exactly where the overlap is, or what I like to say, what can you make of this? And just let it spin and see what it does.
That's the whole purpose, because
that's so huge. No one does like that was unbelievable that would be available just like 2 years ago. The fact that you're doing it at all is astonishing.
Well, we couldn't do it until AI came about. That was really because who was going to count every word? And if you had me, let's say I could do it, people would say, oh, Courtney's just biased. He cherry-picked the words. You can't trust it. But now we have the actual transcripts themselves available to any AI. So if somebody says, I don't think they're telling the truth, recount all the words yourself. So you tell your AI to do the analysis again. They would count all the words themselves. Anybody can redo it, and they can calculate the statistics all over again. So it's proof. If you ever saw proof.
What you're describing, like this project, the Vault and the AI layer that you've kind of put on top of this it's probably orders of magnitude superior to what even the military had when they were throwing money at this, and probably still to this day. I mean, I'm sure that they use AI to sort of sift through the data, but the fact that the average person can access this data, which is such high quality to begin with, and then it's all broken down for them in such a digestible format. And then I love what you said. You could choose your AI. If you don't like ChatGPT, then you use Grok or use whatever. Claude.
And you just ask it to make heads or tails out of it. What's often very useful is to realize that our vault, not the vault, but the video library at farsightprime.com is so expansive and so huge. You sort of say, well, where do I start? What do I do? And what do I... It's spine-tingling to watch any one of them, but it's a little bit like going to Netflix. What are you going to see? What's going to make your day? So if you take some of the transcripts and say, okay, let's look at the JFK assassination and 9/11 projects, just give them what do you say is going on? Just tell it that. And then the AI will say, well, looking at these, this is what's actually going on. And then you go to watch the actual project knowing that your AI independently told you that these projects are really valuable. Then you want to see them. Then you want to say, oh my gosh, well, let me see that. And then you hear, like with 9/11, you actually see Dev Smith and Dick Algar sort of describing exactly what was going on, how the towers were collapsed, how Building 7 came down, what happened with the Pentagon attack. But before that, you had to sort of just say, well, who knows? But now you do know.
I've watched a bunch of these, and Daz is fantastic. I've interviewed Daz. He was so cool. Let me ask you this, because I want to back up a little bit, and I want to talk more about you personally and how this became your work. But before I do that, I want to just touch on one question.
Sure.
Does a target produce consistent data regardless of who the viewer is or when the session takes place?
Yes, if they're good.
So in other words, if you had a target in 1981 and you had somebody remote view it, and then that same target was assigned to a different remote viewer in 1991 and another person in 2025, and you compared their notes, different countries, different parts of the world, all blind, double blind, would we see the data? In other words, is that objective regardless of who's doing the viewing or when?
Absolutely, if the viewers are high quality. Now, our viewers are professional. That's all they do. That's what they do for a living. So that's how they pay their rent. So they do this full time. And they went through years of training before they actually worked on our projects. So it wasn't like they were given a half hour of training like the type of stuff they did in universities back in the 80s and 90s, and they called that science. The process is sufficiently delicate to get those mental images that you really have to be good at it and trained a lot in it. And then you have to be tested under verifiable conditions. Are you actually doing it accurately? And when they get to be really good, we do. You also asked earlier in the interview about, is there any sort of limit to how many remote viewers? Well, and the reality is, yes, there is a limit, because the limit is how many remote viewers that you have that are competent that can do this. So if you had 100 remote viewers who are perfectly competent, yeah, you could do it. But we don't have 100. We basically work with 5 typically, sometimes 6, sometimes 4, sometimes 3, but always 4 is sort of the average, and then typically we go to 5. But, we run out of viewers after that. And, so
but
that's the limit.
Conceivably, like an intelligence agency or a military operation with a functionally unlimited budget could throw enough resources to put 50, 100 or whatever remote viewers on something.
Yeah, but understand the bureaucracy here. Yeah. The military people aren't going to wait around for years for someone to be well trained like this. Now, in some cases they will, and they do things like that. But If you look at the people who are being used to telepathically connect with UFOs to bring them down, they're using shortcut methods, and some of the methods involve drugs. So drugs is a very heavily used element that is used by governmental sources to speed up this whole process. They basically put the person into a zombie state, and then they basically get the ISB to talk, and without the conscious mind intervening. That doesn't require any training, it requires drugs. So what they often do is they look for people who are sort of got a natural talent, sort of psychic, then they drug them. And then they get sort of instant stuff. Some of the things I've heard described are they're trying to use it in military applications so that they can get telepathic communications between people in Washington and you might call a sender, and someone on the ground, which is a troops that's in Afghanistan or Iraq or someplace like that. With the idea is that they would use intel to know where the enemy troops are located, and they want to be able to tell the person to go left or to go right, and what to do. And the idea is, in some situations, it would be they'd want something that can't be overheard with the radio, so they'd want the sender to telepathically transmit to the receiver, which is a soldier, a specially trained soldier in the field, what to do. And that soldier would then know to go left, to go right, or whatever like that. And very often the senders are heavily drugged. So that's what we've heard. Anyway, we don't do anything. In fact, we go in the opposite direction. We believe that the body and the mind should be as clean as possible and no drugs whatsoever. I don't even drink tea or coffee because of the psychoactive effects of caffeine.
Do they interfere with remote viewing, caffeine?
The military people used to even drink alcohol a lot. Not necessarily all of them, but they used to have a session and then they used to go on ooh-ah experience and go out and have a beer.
Yeah.
So they do all types of stuff. We have really focused on this being, we want to be good at this. And the best way possible is to have the mind in as crystal clear a state as possible, because then that process is a natural, normal thing. And you can use it for the other things that we do as mentalic, such as telepathic communication. You don't have to be sort of zoned out in a remote viewing state to sort of do that.
And it's more convenient to be able to slip into that state and slip out of it. You probably gain more aptitude and discipline over it as you do it, I imagine.
That state that we're talking about is simply a state of focus. So it's not a state of like going into hypnagogic sort of weird place, or it's not a state where you're sort of zoned out or anything like that. It's a state of focus. And where you calm down, you're focused, you're then perceiving what you're supposed to be perceiving, and you're writing it down, and you're trusting the process. So that state of total focus requires a really pure nervous system. And drugs are not a good. Drugs are like throwing a monkey wrench into your car's engine and then expecting it to run okay afterwards. I mean, anyway, so that's it. So we don't do the things, but the government does that type of stuff because they want results and they want results fast. And that's what we've heard. The government doesn't communicate to us directly about these things. They do watch what we do. They absolutely watch what we do. And part of the military, we've been told, I don't know what the percentages are. Let's just arbitrarily say half. Half of the military wants us wiped off the face of the earth, Farsight, which is why we're shadow banned on Google and YouTube and things like that. You can still find us, but you have to search for Farsight. And the other half of the military defends us. And it's only because we have that level of defense that we're still able to function. It's a long and interesting history of how that came to be.
Take me back, if you will. I've watched a number of interviews that you've given, and people tend to ask you a lot of questions about remote viewing, but I'm curious about your beginnings in this space. Like how did you go from the academic world into embracing this as your work, and what drew you to it?
You want the truth?
Yeah. No, bullshit me.
Okay. Without any coverings behind it, and you might have to follow this up later, but I myself have had a huge number of extraterrestrial communications contacts since I was a kid. All while I was a kid, when I went to sleep at night, there would be two ETs on my left and 2 ETs on my right every single night. They were grays. And that was way before Whitley Strieber ever wrote Communion. And no one talked about grays, but they were 2 on my left and 2 on my right. They didn't harm me. They didn't do anything, but they were like guards. They were protecting me when I slept. And I woke up, and when I got up in the morning, and this isn't something I got through dreams or hypnosis. They were just 2 guys on my left and 2 guys on my right, and I knew they were there. And when I got up in the morning, I said, shouldn't I tell my mother about you guys? And they said, no, it'll worry her. Just let it be. So I had a whole bunch of other things happen, but I won't go into all of those. But basically, I had constant communication going out through my whole life. And they gave me sort of suggestions for things to study. And I always had an interest in space things. Like when I was a kid, like 10 years old, I built a radio transmitter to be able to talk to space people. Now, they didn't need that, but it was a kid, and it was so powerful. I did it with parts that I got from Radio Shack. It doesn't exist anymore. But
I remember Radio Shack.
And it was powerful enough. It blasted all over East Coast. And I was 10 years old. And the authorities picked it up, and they actually came to my neighborhood in a rural area of New Jersey, and they talked to all the kids on the street saying, hey, look, we think there's some kids on motorcycles with illegal walkie-talkies talking. You ever see any kids on motorcycles? And all the kids knew what they were talking about and said, no, we don't have any teenagers here with motorcycles. No, but they all knew it was me. And then I built a radio telescope. Didn't work very well, but I built one, a huge thing with the curved antenna. I built underground laboratories where I was digging holes in the ground where I would actually be able to walk around. I mean, it was just crazy stuff, but I look at it now in retrospect, I said, okay, this is just what was happening. And then when I got to, let's fast forward, when I got to college, graduate school, they nudged me and told me to read Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy, which riveted. I was really good with math, and I said, that's what I want to do. That's it. I wanted to be Harry Seldon. So there were the theory of psychohistory, which is used to forecast the collapse of the galactic empire and then the resurrection of what came afterwards, so that it wouldn't be a long 30,000 years of hell, but rather a short rebirth, and then, the galaxy is alive again. That was both a mathematical and a psychic element. And that is how I got that's why I did my PhD as a mathematical modeler. I had to learn how to do that. And I went to the one university where they had a social science program where they taught that under the leadership of my mentor, which was a guy called John Sprigg. And where he was the only place I could do nonlinear social systems with nonlinear differential equations interlinked and all that stuff. Okay. And then later on, fast forwarding again, the military came out with their remote viewing project. I didn't know how to do the psychic component of psychohistory, but I was getting an understanding of the mathematical stuff. And this flyer just appeared on a desk as I was walking by at the university, saying, "Come here, these remote viewers talk about extraterrestrials." I said, "What's that?" I picked it up, and so I went to it, and that was the first public discussion that they had of the military remote viewing people coming out and actually talking about that. And there was a 2-star general there, and there was a bunch of other. It was okay. All right, so I said, "This is great." I wanted to learn that, and I asked if I could learn, and they said, "No one's teaching it." They wanted just to do applications and stuff like that. But I did hear that they went to the Monroe Institute to get practice doing out of body as well as telepathic communication stuff. So I did that, and then I also did the TM Transcendental Meditation program to learn how to meditate really deeply. And then about a year after that, I was meditating deeply, and I said, "But how am I going to do the other half of psychohistory?" And this is going to sound weird, but this happens to me all the time. This being came into my mind while I was meditating and said, "The course is ready. Call this person and this location this afternoon." And I said, "What? Okay." And this is one of the persons that said, "No, they're not doing anything." Anyway, I found the person's number. I called the person. And the person said, "It's so interesting you call. We just started the course. You'll be the second student." And that sort of got me started. I took the week-long course, and then I ended up collaborating with that person. I don't mention the person's name. There's been disputes since then, but I collaborated with that person in the writing of my first book. I wrote the book entirely myself, but he was a monitor for me in doing the sessions, and that's how I became good at this process. And that was my first book, called Cosmic Voyage. And Cosmic Voyage is now available as a free download and on my personal website, which is CourtneyBrown.com. Anyways, that was that was how I did, and that was a study of the use of remote viewing for extraterrestrial life. Okay, after that, I wrote Cosmic Voyage, and then I was trying to get it published, and I finally got a publisher, Putnam. Now, Putnam is the leading publisher at the time on the planet. That's where the Pope published his writings, Putnam. And I had a last meeting with the editor and the lawyer in Manhattan, the big lawyer in Manhattan. And they said, well, we want to publish the book, Courtney, but we have to have a way to replicate this type of stuff. So there has to be an institute to show how this stuff works. And I said, no, you don't understand. I'm an academic. I work at a major university. I write books and then I walk away. And they said, well, we can't publish the book under that circumstances. We have to, because there's got to be an institute. I said, what? And so they said, if you want us to publish the book, Courtney, you got to start something. So I said, that's how the Farsight Institute actually started.
So what year was this? When was this?
That was in I think the book came out in 1995. No. That was 1980s. Let me see. When did the book actually, Cosmic Voyage?
To get at when the official Farsight Institute really.
Oh, the official Farsight. The official, and I don't have the Cosmic Voyage behind me. I should grab that. I can actually get that. Anyway, the official Farsight thing started in 1996.
96.
Okay, so that the book came out probably in 1995, something like that. So then the Institute started in 1996. And that was that started out as a nonprofit, but since then we have a for-profit movie business, which is what we publish everything on farsightprime.com, and we have the nonprofit. The nonprofit doesn't do very much, but the movie business is where we publish almost all of our stuff these days. Sometimes you're very limited with what you can do with a nonprofit. For example, OpenAI, which publishes ChatGPT, is desperately trying to move to a for-profit. It's currently a nonprofit in order to make it more easy to do what they do.
Yeah.
I
think take me through those early days when you were first starting Farsight and it was turning into, how did it turn into what it is today? I mean, you've accumulated an enormous amount of information and sessions, and you've put together this amazing group, but it didn't happen overnight. What was that process like?
Well, at the first, the military people, including the ones we knew and the ones we didn't know who were military intelligence that were behind the scenes, they didn't like us. Then the reason was because I was the first book out that talked about the remote viewing process, and they wanted the limelight. The military people that came out of the military process, they wanted to be the ones in the light. And they were very upset that a professor at a major university, a star, who did nonlinear modeling, who taught at major universities, was getting all the light. That was supposed to be their thing. Now, the military released the remote viewing process and those viewers with the intent that they would hang around in the New Age bookstore community. It was never supposed to get mainstream. And suddenly, I was not what they were expecting. They were not expecting a leading researcher, a mainstream professor, to grab hold of this and run with it.
And particularly somebody with your mathematical background who could apply a rigorous, disciplined approach to this whole thing. I mean, that's probably way outside of what they expected.
My background was pristine, and that took them by surprise, because they definitely didn't want this to get accepted and out there by the mainstream. So when we started this up, they initially had a desire. They had a desire to dampen us down or eliminate us, one or the other. Now, I know this for a fact because one of the military intelligence people came to our studio at the time with all of our people around and described the entire process. They said the suits came by, they told them this, they told them to go tell Courtney this, that we're going to tamp you down and maybe eliminate you, but if you obey the rules, we won't eliminate you completely, but it'll tamp you down. Wow. And they were going to focus on And this is a card-carrying intelligence person who I knew, totally honest. And they were going to focus on health. They were going to try to make it sound like a remote viewing was dangerous to your health and thing. But then they changed it to, because there was a program that I did on the Art Bell show and that focused on the so-called Hale-Bopp anomaly. It was a thing. A guy I knew, Chuck Schrammick, an amateur astronomer and newscaster in Houston, Texas, had taken 100 pictures of this anomaly that you could see line of sight in the Hale-Bopp thing, if he focused on Hale-Bopp. To his surprise, he published a few of them on his website. To his surprise, one of the leading astronomers on the planet Earth, I won't give you a name, but one of the leading, by the way, Chuck told me this personally, one of the leading astronomers on the planet Earth called him up. Now, Chuck was a newscaster. He had an unlisted number. This would be before cell phones. You're not supposed to be able to get his number. This guy called him up and said, hey, look, we want you to take that picture down. We don't want that up. Take it down. And he was really forceful. And Chuck said, well, first of all, how did you get my number? Second of all, you're a major astronomer, like super famous in the whole planet with super defense funding. You control millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars with space telescopes and everything. What are you doing talking to me? And he said, just don't mess with us. Take those pictures down. Well, Chuck didn't take the picture down. And he called again. The guy came again, and he threatened him again.
Is this somebody that we would all know if we heard the name?
No, but I would get sued if I mentioned the person's name. The person may be retired or dead now. It's been quite a while. It was back in the mid-1970s. So I'm sure he's retired. He may be dead, but I don't want to get into any type of legal issues. But it was a man astronomer, and you'd have no trouble Googling it and finding out, oh my gosh, he ran that observatory, that type of a thing. Okay. So what we did is we took the picture that was Chuck Schrammick's picture, and we did some remote viewing sessions on the fly before an Art Bell show, and got some initial data. And I talked about that on the thing. And the basic results were that it was like a portal. You could see it line of sight, and out of the portal was coming like ships and things like that. That got translated in Art Bell's day to UFO following Hale-Bopp. Now, we didn't say a UFO was following Hale-Bopp. That was Art Bell. And then he had another remote viewer that he liked to ask on his show a lot, a guy called Ed Dames, who said that this UFO following Hale-Bopp was actually containing a plant pathogen weapon.
I remember this. I remember seeing Ed Dames talk about that. Yeah.
And it was gonna drop on Africa and wipe out all plant life on Africa. And if you wanted to find the safe zones, he had a remote viewing kit you could buy for $54.95 or something like that.
And if I remember right, he would do these videos from like Hawaii. He lived in Hawaii I don't know if I'm remembering that accurately, but I do remember this whole period. And the bioengineered thing.
And then Art Bell used to promote it like right off the scale. Like, what was going on? Why was Art promoting this guy's stuff? And this is a sale of his remote viewing kit to find the safe zones and stuff. It was anyway. So and then what happened in March? The Heaven's Gate things happened where these eunuchs who had a cult, they literally had cut their testicles off. They killed themselves with the idea they were going to beam up to the UFO following Hale-Bopp and go to heaven or whatever. I don't know. We never heard of them before, and they never contacted us. They never emailed us. They never contacted us. But they did link to Art Bell's website and things like that. After that, now...
They're actually making a movie about the guy who led that group.
Oh, really?
And it's a pretty big star. Who I forget who it is that they got to play him, but it's somebody you would recognize.
It was a crazy group. Anyway, so the basic idea... and the guy with himself, he was getting older, and he was probably wondering what he was going to tell his group of loyal castrati, that it was all a big mistake and they can go home now.
You can't really reverse. Yeah, you can't really.
So telling them all to kill themselves was probably an easy way out for him. Anyway, but backing up on that, the military said, well, this is a better way to get rid of Courtney Brown and Farsight. So our webmaster knew and had a professor who apparently had a thing for her. And he called her up. Or he called her, I think. She called him, and then there was back and forth. And the guy said that he was actually involved in the whole governmental thing. He was a professor at a university. He said he was involved on a special thing involved with his tracking the Hale-Bopp comet and then the anomaly. Now, we never said it was following, but the Art Bell thing, they eventually called it the I think they called it the Hail Mary or something like that. They gave it some name, and it became like a story that was bringing in huge viewership to the Art Bell radio show. Anyway, so they
and Art Bell, for people who are maybe younger and don't remember Coast to Coast or didn't listen to, that was a huge show. I mean, that basically was like the place where all of this stuff got discussed in a free-feeling way.
He had 40 million listeners.
Was it 40 million? No way. Wow.
Yeah, he had 40 million. That was back in the old days, where it was comparable to televangelists back in the old days. I mean, he had 40 million listeners worldwide. Anyway, so the military said, forget the health thing. This is much better. So they connected with this professor who had nothing to do with astronomy, but he told our webmaster that he was involved in the astronomy stuff. And the Intel people got some images from images that were raw, original images from a telescope that had actually taken pictures around this Hale-Bopp thing to show pictures of the anomaly. And they printed those pictures on a film printer. Now, like when you print something from your computer onto a piece of paper? Mm-hmm. Well, in the old days, they did PowerPoint presentations by printing onto slides. And then the presenters would take their slides and go and make a presentation with that. So they printed it onto slide film. They sent my webmaster 3 rolls of this slide film. 2 were completely empty, and the other one had 5 images. So we took one of the images, and the webmaster scanned it in, and there was a thing. Now, out of the blue, Art Bell calls me up and says, Courtney, you mentioned once that you had some astronomer guys send other images. I said, yeah, but we don't do anything. We didn't use them for anything, and we don't have any copyright for those, so we can't talk about those or anything. But your friend Chuck Schrammick, he's been chased out of Houston by all this controversy. He had to go to Florida. You need to help him. You need to help him, Courtney. So can you just talk about the photos that sort of say that there's other photos from some other place? I said, Art, we can't do that. And he said, Courtney, you need to help Chuck. He said he's had to leave his home. He's a newscaster there. And just talk anecdotally. I said, okay. And now I was interested in pleasing Art. So I said, because I wanted to get back on his radio show.
Sure.
And I said, okay, we can do that. As long as you have understand, we talk about it anecdotally and we don't reveal the name or identification of the professor that sent them to us. Now, this guy actually told my webmaster that that there was going to be a major public release in 2 weeks about this whole thing. So it's all going to come out. And she took it at face value. And the military intelligence people who we communicated with after this whole thing, we were told about the whole thing. They have a personality profile for each of us, and then we ranked very high on the gullibility scale.
Is that that's what you found out?
Yeah, that's what they told us. That we ranked very high in the gullibility scale. So that's a quote unquote.
Oh man.
And so we said, okay, we'll go. But anyway, so when we talked about it, and I only talked about it initially for a few minutes to introduce the webmaster, and then Whitley Strieber got on as well. And then it sort of without me participating in it, because I was only on for like 10 minutes, it got bigger and bigger. They were talking more about it, and they were trying to, communicate telepathically with this UFO following. Anyway, there was no UFO following Hale-Bopp. The comet was in the direct line of sight of this anomaly on the film. No UFO would follow a comet. It can get to the planet Earth in a split second. It's not going to use orbital stuff. By the way, this is also something that's going on now. There is a Harvard astronomer, I won't mention his name, but other people are saying that there is a extraterrestrial object that may be, very likely is extraterrestrial of technological origin, entering the solar system, and it looks like it's going to be coming in, and it may And people are starting to say, could it be like dangerous? Like, is it posing a threat or something like that? That's the exact type of thing that happened during the Hale-Bopp thing, where people were saying, you have this thing, no UFO uses orbital, they don't orbit. They don't use orbital stuff. They fly through a solar system in a blink of an eye. They don't use like what we use when we send a rocket up and we have to use orbital trajectories or something. So anyway, but that whole type of thing is, you're seeing it repeat, and with that object.
What do you suspect the end game of that is, though? Like I've heard this because there was a famous, well, it's now famous, it's gone viral. Jeremy Corbell was on a TMZ documentary a few months ago. Did you see this? Where he said there's going to be, he's like, you're going to be told a lie. The lie is coming, and it's going to be that there is this object coming to Earth and it's non-human in origin, and that's the thing they want you to believe. And that in the UFO community, I know, has been simmering under the surface very much so lately with the stuff that Avi Loeb has talked about.
Well, that's the type of thing I'm talking about, that type of story. It's a repeat of the Hale-Bopp thing. And it worked very well back in the old Hale-Bopp days, because people are easily rattled by, it's a War of the Worlds thing, where the aliens are coming in and they're going to do, but that's totally rubbish. I mean, it's like, it's rubbish.
What's the goal, though? Why perpetuate that story? Why put that out there?
If they pursue it, and I'm not saying that Harvard astronomer is involved with a conspiracy or a false flag or anything. I'm not saying anything. He might be doing everything totally legitimate, and he just believes that this is an extraterrestrial object. That he may believe just everything exactly as it is. But the government uses things like this to distract people and to create fear so that they don't ask what's really going on, which is the extraterrestrial contacts that are active between the United States government and the ETs, what we call the bad ETs. There are good ETs and bad ETs, but that's a whole nother story. We can talk about that if you want. But the basic idea is that the government has written agreements with what we call the bad ETs to give technological transfer using crashed UFOs in order to have weapons development for the production of what we would call a secret space program. Now, the existence of the written agreements, which specify that secrecy is absolute, it cannot be violated. That's part of the written agreements. That's not in dispute if you know anything. Google Haim Eshed, Haim Eshed, Eshed. He was the CEO of the Israeli Space Directorate for 30 years. He's also decorated general, and he is also a college professor now. He thought he was going to get away with it. And in a publication that was a Hebrew publication he thought would be too small, he talked about the whole thing, the written agreements, the extraterrestrials, the technology transfer, stuff like that.
Weird art. That was so strange to see that in print. And you're like,
he didn't think it would come out, but it turned out, Clint, that a whole bunch of people know Hebrew, and it was immediately translated into every language on the earth. So he was probably taken by surprise more than anyone. Anyway, so what happened is we were set up in this thing with Art Bell. I'm not saying Art Bell consciously or knowingly set us up, but the military intelligence people set everything up. They had these images sent to this professor. The professor sent them to our webmaster. We developed them. We didn't do anything with them. Art Bell called me up at the exact right time, begged me to go to talk about these things. Then we talked about them. And then the verbal agreement that we had is that we would not release them to the public because we don't have the copyright. Art Bell just a little while later said these were official photos that were submitted by Courtney Brown.
Wow.
And he was going to release them in January. He released them in January against everything that we had agreed. And it was a verbal agreement over the phone, but he released them in January. 24 hours later, two mainstream astronomers from the University of Hawaii called him up and said, hey, they were taken from our website. This is theft. This is crazy. Anyway,
kicked off a whole firestorm.
It kicked off a whole thing. And then it was like, we took them from their website. We didn't even know the website. Besides, the actual slides we looked at under a loop. A loop is a magnifier. Let me give you a loop.
It's like a little shot glass.
Yeah, it's a let me see if I can find my loop. Okay, I'll show your audience would like to see the loop if I can find it. Unfortunately, I can't find it right now, but it's, I don't know why I can't find it, but, oh, here it is. Okay. This is literally the thing we used. It's the thing, you put it on top of the slide and you look into it and you can see everything. And what you have is the slides were printed and you could actually see the pixel lines on it razor sharp. You can't get any of those pixel lines with anything taken from the web. It was razor sharp. So it was clearly an original image that we use. But, the astronomer said we took it from their website. Art Bell was screaming, Courtney Brown misled us. It was all taken from the website. So there was this. And then there was this huge public scandal where I tried to defend myself. He brought me on the show one more time with Whitley Strieber, and I tried to defend myself. I could hardly get a word in edgewise. And Art was really focusing on trying to get me to reveal the name of the professor that sent us the stuff. And I said, look, these were sent to us by FedEx. So I don't want to be sued. And he said, how can you sue it? You have proof they were sent by FedEx. And I said, no, you can't do anything like that. Anyway, so long story short, later on, we were causing a dispute within the military intelligence. And some of the people sided with us and they actually had a dispute. And one of them actually came to us and left the agency and was a leaker. It was like a whistleblower type. And he gave us proof of who he was. He handed us a transcript of a telephone call, a very sensitive telephone call that we were talking with Art Bell about. And, that was better than any type of calling card. It was an actual, he obviously had a word-for-word transcript of the telephone call.
Tapped your phone or somehow gotten
anyway. So he explained the whole thing. He said we were going to go after the health thing, but then we decided against it because there's Hale-Bopp thing. And then the goal was they did a personality profile. They did a personality profile on the webmaster, and they said that she would break. And they wanted her on the radio with Art Bell. They said that she would break and that she would reveal the name. But I supported her completely. And I said, no, we made an agreement. No, we're not breaking the agreement. No matter what happens to us, we're honest. And then the military people said, this is what was told to us afterwards. They said it didn't matter. See, the original was she was supposed to reveal the name of the professor. The professor was then supposed to sue for slander at the Institute and then close us all down.
And that would have simultaneously gotten you out of the equation and discredited the whole thing.
Yep, it would have been a complete wipeout. But they were not expecting that we'd hold firm and take the punches and not reveal the name of the professor. And then they finally just said, it was good enough because Art Bell created such a furor, such a storm about this whole thing. The audience said, where there's smoke, there's fire, there must be something going on. Yeah. And then Ed Dames came in and started selling the remote viewing kit for 54, whatever, find the safe zones, a plant pathogen weapons going to be dropped by the UFO following Hale-Bopp. I mean, it went on and on. And then the Heaven's Gate people, they offed themselves, they killed themselves, which was now I don't think the military intelligence people knew about the Heaven's Gate people. I think that landed in their lap. And then now another military intelligence person afterwards said he was absolutely certain somebody got a promotion for how well that discreditation campaign went. He said that was one of the best campaigns that they'd ever seen. It was a complete. Okay, so the basic bottom line is that we were out of the picture completely for remote viewing and for anything. And so we just burrowed down. We just said, okay, we don't want any publicity. Our website stayed up, but other than that, we didn't do anything. And for years, we just did experiments to try to figure out how the remote viewing process worked. And that's how that book, see the book behind me, the remote viewing, that's where that came about.
That's where it came from.
Now, that book went through a very interesting process. I still am, but I was a professor and I wanted to publish it at a major university press. So there was an editor at the University Press of Kansas who was interested in my work, and I sent it there. And it went through Clint, get this now, a 5-year peer review process.
Is that normal?
No, normally it's 6 months or something like that. It went through a 5-year peer review process, so they sent it to absolutely, and there was like 12 reviewers for it, and always it was 2 in favor, 1 against, and there was like one particular reviewer that was just a bug on. Anyway, so no matter what happened, I would do it. I would fix it, no matter what they. And the book was a certain size. By the time I got finished with the 5-year review process, it was twice the size. So I did everything that they asked for to do it. But there's always this one reviewer that was causing problems. Now the other reviewers were famous. They were great, and they were physicists like Fred Allen Wolf and things like that. I mean, they were big. But there was always a problem. And after 5 years, the editor finally said, we have to call it quits. And I said, we can't proceed any further? I said, no. He said, no. And we also have a conservative Republican legislature in Kansas, and we don't know what they would do to our budget if we didn't have total backing with 100% positive reviews. Anyway, so, and that reviewer was weird. And that reviewer, I know who the person is, I won't mention it, but that reviewer didn't even want me to use the word science in the title of the book. I mean, it was just, the person just had a bug on their butt.
Do you think this was associated with the other efforts to sort of discredit the remote viewing world in general?
The person had been involved in the early stuff, and you never really know. A lot of that, there was a lot of money that was defense funding. Now, the military intelligence people told us this. Those professors out there, like the astronomers and things like that, they consider themselves professors that are independent. They got tenure, stuff like that. But they're not that. They're employees of the Defense Department. I said, what? You see, what happens is they get all their money from us. And because they have, Defense Department stuff funds all these astronomers stuff and all the grants, even people who do other areas, but anything in this field, they get National Science Foundation grants. Well, we control all that. We can cancel any one of those things, and they know that they can lose their funding and not be able to pay their mortgage and stuff like that if they go against us. But from the military intelligence point of view, they just called up the people that they wanted to get the images from and made the arrangements, and another professor who was in another university who didn't have anything to do with astronomy, but who knew our webmaster. They made the connections in an hour or two, and they orchestrated the whole thing. I'm not saying that those people are employees of the Defense Department. I'm saying that the military intelligence people consider them employees of the Defense Department because they get so much.
Functionally, that's what the relationship is.
So the professors can think of themselves as independent, tenured, and things like that. But behind the scenes, the military intelligence people says, no, like we own them. We own them.
The effort to discredit remote viewing and to put pressure on Farsight and you personally, and just in general terms, just to kind of suppress this, is that because it is such an effective way of getting information about anything, even stuff that they want to actively cover up?
Yeah, they don't want the mainstream to know.
There's no defense against this.
Yeah, there's no defense against it. There's no defense against it. They don't want the mainstream to know how it could be done accurately and how it can be done well. And so we were sort of an anomaly out there. However, we were very influential within part of the military. And the proof of that is that you're talking to me right now, and the Farsight exists, and we have the largest venue. But trust me, if the military intelligence was uniform about this, we could be snuffed out in the blink of an eye. Look, let me give you an example. Someone could put child pornography in my desk at Emory with the door open so it would be seen by the cleaning staff. What could I do? How could I defend myself? Someone could take a loaded gun and put it in the desk of my office and leave the door open so it would be discovered by the cleaning staff. It's just 2 examples of how easy it would be to get rid of me. They could have some student say, oh no, so-and-so, Courtney made an improper pass, sexual harassment type of stuff. And how could I defend myself against that? The university would say, fire the person and we'll deal with any lawsuit afterwards and things like that. It's so easy to get rid of somebody. So the issue is, I mean, I do the best I can in terms of that. I don't have a computer that's given to me by the university because I don't want a computer in my office where someone could get in the middle of the night and load images on that, illegal images on that computer, and then they would discover pornography transferring across the internet to a university thing. So I don't want any type of capability where that could be done. So I don't own a university computer. I buy my own computers and my own laptops and things like that and bring them to school. So, but there's other ways that could happen. That discreditation could happen as well. And the public would never ask the question, is it real? They just assume it's real and that's the end of that person. Cancel culture. Obviously, I'm talking to you right now. Somebody's protecting us. Somebody is protecting us. So it's a dispute. And so we've had some communication. Now, the intelligence people that support us, they don't communicate with us directly, but indirectly. And I'm not going to go through details of this. I owe them everything. They have saved us on things that you just wouldn't believe. They saved myself, my son. I mean, they have closely monitored absolutely everything we do. And if something is going to get us into serious trouble, they rescue at the last moment. But anyway,
I want to just back up a little bit and touch on something that you were just talking about. Pushback in the academic world and pressure that's put on people. It reminds me a lot of, one of the more prominent names that jumps to mind is John Mack at Harvard, who was famously dragged over broken glass for all intents and purposes, just for taking the idea of abductions seriously. This has been going on for quite some time, and it doesn't look like it's slowed down at all. But there does seem to be a faction that wants to push disclosure forward. What's your take on the situation, the state of play right now?
Okay, John Mack. This is his book, Abduction. Now, he was a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. He wrote the autobiography, not the biography of T. Lawrence of Arabia. He was the founder of his department at Harvard Hospital in psychiatry. He was stellar. You couldn't get higher. And he came out with that book. It was the same thing as when I came out. They had to get rid of him. There had to be a huge controversy. Anyway, I'm not saying that the professors did this because they were knowingly working with intel people. However, John Mack went through hell as the University Senate at Harvard. They tried to get rid of him. They tried to remove his tenure. Mind you, he was founder of his department, Pulitzer Prize-winning author. You can't get better. They tried to get rid of his tenure, to get rid of him. On a phone call that I had with him, he actually asked me if I knew any contributors, like moneyed people, that could help him with his legal expenses. He fought to try to keep his job at Harvard, and finally, basically it was because of an article in the local press that apparently Alan Dershowitz wrote, saying Harvard was violating his tenure. It was also his constitutional right for free speech. Anyway, a week later or so, the dean just closed it up and say, John Mack can do whatever he wants. We're closing the book on that. But no one offered to pay his few $100,000 of legal bills. Harvard never offered to reimburse that.
Well, and at the same time, too, it's important for people to understand, particularly people who are maybe too young to remember this period, but on television, and I remember this very well, I wonder what your take is, they would bring, John Mack in particular, would bring people who had claimed to be abductees onto these interview talk shows like Oprah Winfrey or whatever, and they would tell about their experiences. Dr. Mack would try to walk people through his process and what was going on. And these people were laughed at. They were ridiculed. I mean, on national television in broad daylight, it was really disgusting to watch. What did you make of that cultural sort of response? Or, was that orchestrated to kind of dampen the conversation down on this?
One of the people
of his prestige,
I can't prove this, of course, but it's obvious to me that none of this stuff is accidental.
Yeah.
So one of the people that got involved in John Mack's studies, he did not include in his book. He did not include this lady in his book. But it turned out that she was a plant And her whole purpose, and she admitted this afterwards and tried to discredit him afterwards, was to discredit his process. And after the book came out, she said, yeah, I was involved in that thing and I just gave him junk that I just said. None of it was true. And they listened to it and stuff like that. Now, fortunately, he did not include any of that in his book. But that's a clear case of people trying in advance to set it up, before the fact. And so academics have a tough time. Now, another person I know it was David Jacobs. Now, David M. Jacobs, this is one of his books he did, and he also focused on abduction stuff. So David M. Jacobs did this Walking Among Us. That's his last book. He's retired now. He was a professor at Temple. And, he never got promoted to full professor. And I, for example, have not been promoted to full professor at Emory. And I won't go into any of that right now. But, the issue is they tried to get rid of John Mack's tenure. I came out with my stuff with remote viewing after I'd already had tenure. And David M. Jacobs, he had tenure at Temple. But, we never got beyond that. But at least we were tenured and couldn't be fired easily. Those are warning shots for any other academic that wants to talk about this. I am the only surviving academic. Well, David M. Jacobs is still alive, but in terms of still working in the academy,
right?
I am the only surviving academic that talks about any of this stuff. There are no courses in any university, I believe worldwide, talking about the UAP or UFO phenomena. There are no courses talking about the extraterrestrials. There are no courses talking about remote viewing. There's no courses talking about any of this stuff. Yet they still have congressional hearings with David Grush and others, Lou Elizondo, talking about the crash retrieval program. And David Grush, for example, when he did the congressional hearings, he still worked at the Pentagon and still had his he still had his Pentagon security clearance. That means that there was an office. He never told anything to Congress that the Pentagon didn't formally allow him to say. That meant his office wanted to get the information out and gave him formal permission, written permission to speak, to say X, Y, and Z in those congressional hearings. There was another office down the hall that said, we don't know anything about it. There's no extraterrestrials. There's no UFOs. It's all garbage. So you can see that the Pentagon is split. One is giving formal written permission to people like David Grush to do congressional hearings, and the other office is denying the entire thing. So you can see that the military has split. And so what we have is a situation in which academics look at that and say, I'm not going to walk into this thing. They know that if they do, they're going to run into the same problems that John Mack ran into, that David M. Jacobs ran into, and that I ran into. And don't make a mistake of thinking that an academic is smart enough to evade this stuff. Remember, I was ranked very highly on the gullibility scale by military intelligence. Academics have absolutely no training for circumventing this type of trap.
There was a great interview very recently with Diana Pasulka in the New York Times, and she even said in that interview, I'm paraphrasing, but she said, I knew from talking to Jacques Vallée and others that I was probably identified as someone who could spread misinformation, who would be really effective at that. And she was on guard. Everybody she dealt with, she didn't know what their game was, what they were trying to do. These are all intelligence community people. You just don't know. And she, was just trying to write a book about all of this, and she just couldn't navigate that minefield very easily. And I think that speaks to your point.
Yeah, I have been in scientific meetings, trying to present this stuff, and I ran into military intelligence people who I knew. Mm-hmm. They were card carrying. I knew who they were. They were not secret.
No question about it.
Yeah. No question about it. And they actively, one in particular, but a few of them, they actively combated me. And one time, one particular meeting, I was a member of the board of the Society for Scientific Exploration, and I was actually presenting to the board a way that we can make our stuff better by including video in our presentations and so on. The guy came up with every type of objection possible, but I kept on going. He finally ended up when all else fails, is just to make noise. He ended up just laughing. He just squelching my entire presentation, so I couldn't do it because he was screeching at the end of the table, at the end of the boardroom, and I couldn't present anything. And so their job is to disrupt this kind of thing and to not let this stuff get out, and they have people placed in these organizations to make sure nothing gets out.
I want to hit you now with probably the most challenging question that I can ask you.
Okay.
Because we have about 10 minutes for this question, and then I want to ask you a kind of a wrap-up question, and I want to be respectful of your time. Here's my challenging question. What is the situation in which humanity finds itself right now?
This really deserves a part 2.
I want you to tee up a part 2. I'm going to hit you up for a part 2 after this. But the reason I'm asking it this way is because I wanted to sort of establish the lay of the land of what you're up against, the type of work that you do, why it is so significant, and how it reveals information that people are completely blind to. You've basically identified and described a completely different world than what people think is actually going on. And if you could you try to touch on that? Just give us a brief idea.
Okay, I'll give you the shortest possible.
I know it's not easy.
No, I can summarize it in just a couple of minutes, but then it's going to raise so many other questions. This planet is being run as a prison. Now, that's not an analogy or a metaphor, literally a prison. The ETs that have written agreements with the United States government and Google, Haim Eshed, the director of the Israeli space program, you can get it, you can find it on Google. The ETs that have written agreements with the United States government that include secrecy and everything like that, they are doing really bad stuff. They have their own programs here, but they had to be given written formal approval to do it because there's another group of extraterrestrials, the ones that are on my side, the ones that we work with, that we call the good ETs. And they don't like it when I say this, but essentially they're free will fanatics, meaning they have the military capability to dispense with the bad ETs, but they can't do anything unless humanity agrees in some way. The bad ETs have all of the political leadership, much of the military leadership, and all the corporate, everybody, all locked up through various means, through mental manipulation, bribery, everything you can possibly imagine. And yes, probably the Epstein thing falls into that somehow as well. But they've got it all locked up. And the only way that this can be broken is to collapse the information control system on this planet. Because you can say you're talking to me, and this is a lot of new information coming to you, and you're probably asking, your viewers are asking, why haven't I been hearing about it? Well, why are we shadow banned on Google? Why are we shadow banned on YouTube? Why did the whole Hale-Bopp thing happen? Why do other scandals happen? Why did John Mack and David M. Jacobs have their problem? The issue is it's so heavily controlled. I'll give you an example. November, we have actually board meetings where all the people at Farsight meet in our boardroom, and 2 extraterrestrials, and sometimes there's a third around the back, but 2 extraterrestrials physically show up and they talk to us. And we have communications that we record on video and we publish on YouTube as well as on farsightprime.com.
You say physically show up. Just what do you mean by that?
We can see them perfectly clear because we had done the remote viewing thing where our minds are capable of seeing them, but you wouldn't be able to see them, but they're physically there. And everybody detects the exact same people. And they're different people each time. Sometimes we've had military people come by, we've had social scientists come by, we've had an AI come by, we've had 2 AIs come by, we've had a gray, and then most of them are humanoid types, but they come by and they talk to us. The basic idea that we're been told is that the Farsight library on farsightprime.com, they were the ones who got it there. They told us what to do. This is another episode we'll have to cover. They told us what to do, the whole step. I'd like to take credit for everything. Just say Courtney's a genius. He created all. Honestly, Clint, they told us what to do. We did it. The library is what it is because it's the only verifiable clean record with no bias of what the real history of humanity, including political scandals, actually is. It's the only one. Everything else is he said, she said stuff that's manipulated by the controllers. So the process now is on one of our board meetings on November 13th, they told us, we're going to do something new, guys. We're going to show up with ships all over the place, all over the world, and we're not going to have any cloaking technology. You'll be able to do it. So just tell everybody to go out with their cell phones and everything else, and you'll be start in a few days. We published it on November 15th. On November 18th, the so-called drone thing exploded worldwide. And then the military and the U.S. government was hilarious. The first thing the Pentagon did was to say, well, first thing they said is, we don't know who that is or what they are. Second thing they said was they were an Iranian mothership off the coast of New Jersey that was launching these things. And then that only lasted for 2 hours, and the Pentagon officially took it down. A couple of weeks later, they said it was a Chinese mothership, and that got a little traction. It even got onto the Sean Ryan podcast. And then President Trump later said, no, I've asked it. These are all experimental aircraft authorized by the FAA. Now, that's crazy because the FAA doesn't have any jurisdiction over the world, and they were worldwide. They were not over just New Jersey or anything. And the ships had no heat signature, no transponder, which was absolutely legally required for any human ship. And they were flying over restricted airspaces all over the place. Washington, they were all over military bases, nuclear facilities, everything. They were flying everywhere. And it was nonstop. Everybody had cameras out, and they were all taking pictures of them. And then come around January, it stopped. And when President Trump said they were just FAA experimental aircraft, the whole story went away. To this day, it's like it never happened. And then in another board meeting, they told us, no, the reason we did that is everybody was saying, just show up with your ships. Have disclosure. Just show up with the ship. And we had to show you that it didn't matter what ships we showed up with. We came up with thousands of our ships. And to this day, it just blasted out. So just showing up with the ships is not enough. You have to completely collapse the information control system first, and then we can talk. And then we have the ability. People will then stop the hypnotic trance between them and the leadership that they're seeing on their TV screens, and they will look at us, and we will circumvent the entire leadership, and we'll talk and explain things. And then the people, the masses, can make a free will decision to want to align to us because we want to help. And as soon as that free will decision happens, they can intervene. They have the military capability to swamp the bad ETs. But the bad ETs know that they won't do that unless there's a free will decision. So that's what's trying to be stopped. They're trying to stop disclosure so that there will be no free will decision that would invite the free will ETs to come in and fix everything. That's the bottom line. So what you're seeing now with these crises all over the world that are happening, they're going to boil out of control. It's going to become a really bad situation economically, militarily. There's going to be a complete collapse of the entire system, and it's by design. It's got to happen. It's the only way the truth can actually come out. And when that happens, everybody on the planet is going to be saying, well, what's really going on? That's why the FarsightPrime.com video library exists. That's why the Vault now exists, so people can talk about it with their AIs. It's to answer all the questions that everyone is going to want to have answers to, because they're going to finally realize that the authorities have been lying through their butts going back to the beginning of time, and they want to know the actual truth. So that's why we built all of this infrastructure. And it's not like just me. I couldn't have done all this by myself. Are you serious? And so, but that's another whole story. That whole FarsightPrime.com, everything is basically an ET thing.
So is it a fair comparison to say it's like we're living in North Korea? It's like being born there. We don't know anything about the outside world except what they tell us, and everything they tell us is propaganda.
Everything.
So when you watch the news, you're getting what the Defense Department filtered through their CIA people at CNN, and then it goes on the air and it's scripted to a certain way.
But don't blame the Defense Department entirely. The Defense Department is split. I don't know what the actual percentages are, but let's say half. Half of them really want this disclosure thing happen. Half of them do not want the continuation of what's been going on. they want this openness, but ultimately there's got to be political decisions that push this in one direction or the other. The military can't do this by themselves. So don't pile up any anger on the military. They're between a rock and a hard place.
But to your point, the information that we're getting, whether it's through someone's the reporter's personal political biases or the chain of information as it moves through the system, getting changed a little bit each time, your method of taking 4-5 different remote viewers, double blind, they're seeing the same thing, they're writing it all down, the data goes into an AI, it gets analyzed, and you come back with what you're saying is clean information. And that clean information, that picture that we see when we look at that information is of a completely different situation than what we think we're in. And it's when I've heard you explain it in the past, and because I've watched a number of different interviews that you've done, you can see why they don't tell people. It's like it is a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, but
how do you even explain this to, you know what I mean? Like
they don't make the mistake of thinking they don't tell people because it's too hard for people to grasp. That's not what's going on. They don't tell people because they don't want people to know. It's not too hard to grasp. The good ETs have been, the crises that we're seeing happening were originally designed by the bad ETs as part of the control process to keep humanity in a constant state of low boil. One crisis after the next, and stretched out over 20 or 30 years. The good ETs that we work with, they're responsible for taking those crises. They didn't create the crises, but they crunch them in time so that they all happen at the same time. That's why you get the European situation boiling out of control, the Middle East situation boiling out of control. Very likely China and Taiwan situation is going to boil out. You're going to see worldwide, and also the enemies of the United States know damn well that they're not going to be able to defend themselves against the U.S. unless they do something domestically within the U.S. The U.S. has always been protected by the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. Europe is vulnerable. Things can happen. Asia is vulnerable. But the enemies of the U.S. now know that they're going to have to do something inside the United States. And a lot of stuff has gone on. During the 4 years during the Biden administration, there was Biden and Harris administration, you had 10 to 14 million people just walk across the border completely unvetted. And you know, the level of drugs that they bring in that feed the drug culture in the United States, that has to be carried with like 18-wheelers and stuff. Those aren't carried by a guy with a backpack.
So there's like an effort to destabilize from within.
That's exactly right. And what basically had happened is when that happened, the enemies of the United States took advantage of that and they slipped in a few thousand of their operatives. So we know that a number of Al-Qaeda operatives have gotten in the United States, and we know that Iranian operatives are in the United States. In addition, they were able to bring in heavy weapons, including missiles and stuff like that. I mean, if you could bring in 18-wheelers of drugs, you could bring in anything. And during that time period, there was no brakes. There was nothing stopping crossing the border. So if you're an enemy of the United States, wouldn't you take advantage of that? And so they did that. And so the real question is, they now have sleeper cells. They don't want to be caught by ICE, so they just hunker down. So the real question is, if there is a confrontation between the United States and other people, are we going to be protected by the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean? Probably not. It's probably going to spill out inside the domestic United States. So what we're looking at is a complete collapse of the system. And when you get the complete collapse of the system, you are finally going to be able to get the truth to be coming out. I mean, if you just think about it, there's another one. I know we want to wrap up now, but just one more thing. Remember how easy it was for the authorities to spin the whole public out of control with the Hale-Bopp scandal. And we never said there was a UFO following Hale-Bopp. There was what we saw was like a portal and ships were coming out. Anyway, but that was just one observation with a photograph that was taken by a friend of mine, Chuck Schramek. Okay. And now we have this another anomaly coming in to the solar system that they say may be, an alien technology and is going through and is slowly coming in. And people sort of complained about what happened back in the Hale-Bopp days, and they're probably going to complain about what's happening with his other object. And I'm saying, are you serious? You're thinking that we did anything with that? Look at what we do now. We have so much information about not a ship that's out in the middle of the solar system. We have information about the ETs on Earth all over the place, doing all types of good things and bad things. And like, the Hale-Bopp is nothing compared to what we've done now. The story that we have now is a true story, not a fiction, of what's actually going on now. And the half of the military people want the story out, and the other half don't know what to do with us but they know they can't stop us because we're protected. The side that is defending us on the U.S. military side, to give them credit, they're curious also, because we do get so much overt support by the extraterrestrials themselves. Even in the very beginning, they told us, the military people that came to us, they said initially we just couldn't figure it out. Why were they helping you? And so we let you continue because they used to snuff out UFO groups all the time. They have easy ways to do that. A classic way of doing that, which is why none of the groups ever grew really big, is once a group started to form and started to gain some momentum, they'd send some young people in that were talented in some way, web design or something like that. And they join and they start volunteering, and then they become, in a matter of a month or two, key people in the group. And then they'd start having arguments, forming, dissent and something. And then big fights would start forming, and then people would say, "Oh, this is not what I signed up for," and the group starts to disband. So they were really good at disbanding groups like that. But the very fact that we're still operating and that everything is so technically perfect and that is so big, that tells you somebody, there's some major effort supporting this. But what we haven't done is we haven't crossed the threshold into widespread acknowledgement of what we have done. So we have like 105,000 people on our YouTube channel, and we have a few thousand people, subscribers on farsightprime.com, who pay all of our bills. But that's like nothing compared to 8 billion people on the planet. So we're still in a phase where we're developing this, but the point where the light is turned on with a switch and suddenly the whole world sees what we've done and what has been, that hasn't happened yet. So this interview is very useful, but it's not yet the switch that will turn on. But we have to be ready for when that happens. We do know that our streaming service, run by Vimeo, it can handle 900 million people watching it at the same time. So it's fully capable.
Do you think it's like a 100th monkey kind of a thing, where once enough people understand what's going on, it'll just click and then we'll just have a phase change, or no?
No, everything is manipulated. You have to crash the system that's controlling the information grid. That's what, it's not a 100 monkey type of thing, because a 100 monkey type of thing assumes that everything is untouched, that it's just a contagion and diffusion process that continues until eventually enough people learn something and then it catches on. You have a grid that locks down information over the entire planet.
And a size suppression field, right? Like
it's a multiple thing. We haven't even covered the stuff about what happens to you after you die, but the size suppression field is one thing, and that's very interesting. I can actually show you the U.S. military official document, intelligence document, where they document the Soviet experiments on the how telepathy is easier in space and it's very difficult on Earth.
If you could send me a link to that, I can put it in our show notes for people to see, and I can actually cut to it in this interview.
I'll try to do that right after the interview and send you the email. I'll probably have to send you the actual document and tell you the page number.
Well, that's okay. Last question for you before we wrap up, and this is probably the most relevant to our audience today. You talked about Ed Dames and other remote viewers who are selling courses. I know there's a lot of different resources online for people who are interested in remote viewing, but one thing that I noticed that you do is you actually offer some of your free of charge. Is that correct? Can you explain how people can...
with regard to Ed Dames and Art Bell and so on, do understand that I'm not criticizing them. There's nothing wrong with the way, I may have had disagreements with Art, but he ran his show as he thought fit, and I just have to assume he did it the way he thought he needed to do it. With Ed Dames, there was nothing wrong with him selling a remote viewing kit to teach basic elements of remote viewing. So I'm not criticizing any of those people. I'm just describing that they do it. That what they did is very different from what we do, and we sort of got caught up in the stuff that they were doing. But on farsightprime.com, we used to have it on YouTube. We have a complete course free for people who are subscribers to farsightprime.com to learn the basic procedures. We also have certified instructors of remote viewing that teach remote viewing on their own. There are people that you actually see on our videos. We don't take a cut. We don't take money from that, but just that there are people that are very well trained. They work and they teach their own courses independent.
These are instructors that have gone through your certification process. They've met the milestones that you set to determine that they know what they're doing. Right?
And
can you describe what that kind of looks like?
Well, the main people that we use are people that you see on all of our projects. And a few of them, 3 of them, like to teach remote viewing on a side by themselves in their own businesses. That's Intisam, Shantae, and Yeme Janae. And one of Intisam's students has actually completed an instructor training level course, and he's also but Intisam, Shantae, and Yeme Janae are in all of our projects. You see them all, not all of them, but you see them on our videos all the time, so you know what they can do. And they particularly like working with students, and so that's what sort of happens there. And on our website, farsight.org, you can easily find them in the you just click on the SRV thing and you see the instructors and the course levels. And when there's certification levels and different courses that people can take all the way up to becoming instructors. On farsightprime.com, we also have video files that people can watch for free that take you through a whole process and you can learn the basics. The procedures are actually in those video files. We use the procedures that are very comparable to the early remote viewing stuff, the CRV stuff, the stuff that Ingo Swann did. We called it SRV, scientific remote viewing, because there were some differences, but it's very similar. But that's not what we use now. We use advanced SRV. And again, among farsighters, we do other things as well. Mentally, we do telepathy. We're also involved in working with other aspects that we're not so good at, but we know it can be done, telekinesis and things like that. And we call ourselves mentalics, but like everyone likes to say they're a remote viewer, but telepathy is not part of the formal understanding of remote viewing. The formal understanding of remote viewing is you're sitting down at a desk and you're writing down perceptions of a target that you don't know anything about and things like that. Telepathy is when you're actively engaged in communicating with someone telepathically in a real live conversation. And that's our board meetings. And that's also, I have meetings myself. Personally, we call them conversations with Harvey. And I go to the beach in secure locations and have these meetings. The last one is going to be published in a day or two. The last one I had just a few days ago. I have a daughter who's a hybrid, half gray, half human. And she was the person that had the meeting. And it was fun. I like meeting with her. I see her a lot on the ships. She's my go-to person when I have to go up and get instructions for what to do. But she was the one who was there. Normally there's a guy who I normally meet with. We call Harvey. That's not his real name. Anyway, she surprised me this time. She showed up and it was her. And it was, her name is Ebonique. And that was the conversations with Harvey, but this time with Ebonique. And it was fun because she's about the same age as my son, Aziz. And it was really great. At the end, she didn't want to stop because she liked the idea. She had never had an experience. We meet all the time on the ships, but she'd never had experience us being on the beach. She knows I love the beach. I'm a big surfer. That's an understatement. She knows I like to sit on the beach. And her brother, my son Aziz, who you see on all of our videos, he gets to go with me to the beach and sit at the beach. And she hasn't had that experience ever. We meet on the ships, but we don't have the beach experience. And she knows how much I enjoy the beach and how Aziz loves being with his dad at the beach. So she was having this meeting with me on the beach. And at the very end, she was just sitting there. She didn't want it to end. I said, well, what's going on? She said, I want the same experience as my brother. I want to sit with my dad on the beach. And I'm sitting with my dad on the beach right now. And it was just so human. I mean, she's half gray, half human. But the point is, it was so human. It was like my daughter wanted to be with me on the beach.
And this
just
is
like your brother Aziz.
and that is funny. I imagine it's got to be difficult for people who aren't educated in these abilities and who don't even know that these things are possible to even understand what it is that you are doing. And you're having these meetings. You're saying you can almost like your remote viewing sense is layered on top of the visual field, and you can see them in the space.
Yeah, it gets to be the point where we don't separate them anymore. It's so easy. There's a reason for it, and if you bring me back, we can talk about why people can't do that normally here. It has to do with an experience they have after death. We call it the death traps. But the point is, it's very alien experience for most people, but it's not alien experience for us. And we have absolutely no trouble communicating telepathically. Let me say this much. On the ships, they do not use the English language or any physical language. All of the major communications between ship members are telepathic, and they have absolutely no trouble doing that. The captain doesn't tell the the human type captain doesn't tell the gray that's operating the controls to send the ship to the left or right. Doesn't say, "Okay, Joe, I want you to take the ship 90 degrees to the left and then make a right turn around that object." They don't do that. They just telepathically communicate what needs to be done, and the level of understanding is absolutely perfect, way better than verbal communication. And that's totally alien to normal humans. The reason I like people to watch our ET board meetings is the Farsight people in general are somewhere in the middle. So normal humans have like almost no telepathic capabilities. The ETs have it as their primary means of communication across the entire galaxy. That's what they do. That's how they
standard,
talk.
The gold
That's
standard.
the standard. That's the standard. And Farsight people are sort of in the middle. We're not as good as the ETs themselves, but we're way better than the standard human. So we're in the middle. So when you watch the ET board meetings, you actually see us in a way that's more understandable to a normal human, to how the telepathic experience sort of works. It's not like if you just watch ETs communicate, you wouldn't understand any of it because they're not talking, they're not saying it, they're just doing stuff.
And weird.
But when you see us, we're verbalizing what we're picking up. And we're saying, this is what I'm hearing they're saying. And you hear that discussion. So that's why the ET board meetings are so useful, because when you watch them, you can relate to the telepathic communications that are happening, and then verbalized so they can be picked up by the mic.
And
Does that make sense?
This is not the same as channeling, right? This is different than when
channeling is totally different.
Okay.
Channeling is where you essentially let somebody come in and take over your body and vocal cords and speak through you, and you're sort of sidelined. We don't like channeling, and the reason we don't like channeling is like you have a car and you go put it on the street with the windows open and the key in the ignition, and you walk away. Now, good people are going to come by and say, "My gosh, look at that. They left the keys in the ignition. The window's open. Should we call the police?" Then say, "Oh, they're probably coming back." But then next, some kid's going to come by and say, "Well, look at that. The window's open. The keys in the car." He's going to jump in, zip off, steal the car. So if you open yourself up with channeling, I'm available. Speak to me. Who's going to jump into that body and take over? Is it going to be the good guys or the bad guys? So what's going to happen is the bad ETs are going to say, we're not going to miss an opportunity like this. And they're going to jump in and they're going to say all types of narratives. A very common thing, for example, is for channelers, famous ones, I'm not going to mention any names, but famous ones have said things like, the grays are not actually extraterrestrial. They're future humans who destroyed their own environment through wanton misuse of the environment. They felt terribly guilty, and then they changed their own genetics so that they wouldn't make mistakes again. And then they ran into a cul-de-sac. They couldn't evolve any further. So they had to come back in time to correct the mistake. And that's why they're doing here. And that's where the abduction phenomenon comes across, because you have the mixing of genes with the Greys as well as the humans, but it's actually our future humans coming back and we're actually helping them and so on. That's totally rubbish. None of that is true. None of that is true. What happened was that there was another civilization of humanoid types that looked very much like you and I. They were conquered by another extraterrestrial group we call the reptilians, but the reptilians themselves didn't actually fly the ships. They had proxy armies that came in to do it, but nonetheless, they were in control. And they captured that group. And that group was actually very much like us. They were a little bit more emotional than us, if you can imagine that. But they captured them and they stuffed them into these bodies that were genetically engineered that we see now called Greys, where they have very little ability to experience emotion. Because every time you have a thought or an emotion, there's chemicals that hormones and other molecules that come out in the brain that allow that emotion to manifest. And those brains can't experience that. And they needed that as a slave force that could do things like horrible experiments to humans and this abduction process and other types of stuff that's going on, and that they wouldn't question it. They wouldn't have like empathy for the people they're torturing and doing things to. And so they needed that slave force. So that's where the Greys actually came out. They were a conquered species, just like us. They took their ISBs, packed them into genetically engineered bodies, and then they came up out of whole cloth with this stupid story about future humans and coming back in time and we're rescuing them and all that type of thing. So you feel like a heroic type of a thing going on. They came up with that. They're trying to reinvent history, to rewrite history, to cover up what really happened. So if you want to know what really happened, it's on farsightprime.com. It's one of our projects, the Greys. So you can actually know what the history of the Greys actually is. That's what's so important about the vault. You get lies every which, even the New Age people, and believe me, all the channelers are the best people on the planet Earth. They're really good people. They're honest, they're trustworthy, they're everything, but they're being controlled. They're being manipulated by forces that are way beyond their pay grade.
I think that's the point that I want to leave people with, because it's like you've kind of talked around this a little bit, but what you're saying sounds like we are just out of our depth. Like we are competing in a system that was here long before we showed up, that it's going to be here forever after we're gone. And this system has been running this whole time. We just don't even understand the rules of it, how it works, what our capabilities are. So how could we possibly face down what we're up against without some kind of help?
Without a complete collapse of the information control system. That's what's needed. And then that's why we've been working for decades on farsightprime.com to have this video library, and then we'll have the vault so people can have the video library itself is so massive, you don't know where to start. But now the vault makes it accessible. So we had to wait till AIs were universally available so that they could go through the vault and explain to the humans what's going on with all these video projects. And then when you watch the video projects, it's spine tingling. Some of the projects are like 3 hours long, many. And I have never heard a single complaint saying they were too long.
Oh, they're awesome. They're awesome. I will sit there with a coffee and I will just watch, and I'm just, the whole time I'm just flabbergasted, because you can see in real time. I mean, it's so true. You can see their face light up, then they're like, well, that's weird. I don't understand why I'm getting this, but it's just kind of, it's different. And when you watch a channeler, it's like someone just talking at you, but the remote viewer, it's like they're discovering it as they go and you're watching them in real time. Very unique. Very cool.
Yeah, the ET board meetings are like that as well. They're actually communicating telepathically and then trying to figure out what kind of words to use to explain what so you get that sort of very believable experience. And remember, anyone who's doubtful, all of the transcripts is a data set that is the only data set on the whole planet Earth that has it, and every single word is in that data set. And it's all been analyzed, and it's all available for reanalysis by your own friendly AI in your own living room.
Dr. Brown, Courtney, this has been such a phenomenal conversation. I'm so glad that we got to sit down and chat. Thank you so much for carving out the time. You've been very generous with your time. I know you're extremely busy. I definitely want to do a part 2 follow-up to this. And I think what I'm going to do before that is I'm going to spend some time in the vault, and I'm going to spend some time with a couple of AI friends, and we're going to parse through this data. And if you would be so kind, I would love to invite you back to help me understand that in our audience.
It'd be great. I love doing this, and you know, this is really important because interviews that you're making right now will become crucial for people to see in the very near future when the light turns on and everybody's asking questions. They're going to turn to you and others on the web where the interviews have taken place to get the explanations because it's so much to go through. They need to have somebody like yourself saying, let's take this apart one step at a time.
It's
need that.
just huge. I mean, it's beyond what most people I think can keep comfortably in their mind at one time, and I think that's going to need its own show to really just drill down on that. But is there anything? Oh, go ahead.
You also want to ask me about what happens to people after they die. That part of the prison system is very important to understand. It's a little scary, but it's important for people to know it.
I think that's the key thing to start with is sort of what are the rules of the game we're all playing here? How does it how is it structured? And then we can go into the larger opera of what's actually going on, which is pretty crazy.
I see, it's like a Wagnerian opera.
Oh, it's unbelievable. I can't wait. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you want to leave people with before we wrap it up?
Believe it or not, this is a good chunk, but a fairly small good chunk of everything that's happened that we've done. And it's a great starter. You couldn't be better in terms of introducing people to what we've done. So there's really no final sort of take-home message other than I hope you're intrigued and I hope you want to hear more.
Outstanding. Courtney, thank you so much for your time. I'll reach out to you again in a follow-up email, and then we can plan out next steps.
Super.
Outstanding. Have a great rest of your day.
Same with you.